good morning to everyone joining today. Good morning, everyone, to joining today. My name is Jairo Hakopian. As a member of the Paris Committee of Capacity Building, PCCB, I would like to welcome you all to the third day of Capacity Building Hub here at COP28. Today's theme is CapaCITIES Day, Learning from and Transforming Our Cities. CapaCITIES Day is a pivotal for collaborative urban innovation in the face of the climate crisis, emphasizing diverse partnerships and dynamic approaches. It expands cities' climate agendas to meet community needs. Through sessions promoting stakeholder involvement and transparent decision-making, CapaCITIES Day empowers cities to address the climate emergency. It serves as a platform for learning, idea exchange, and collaborative sustainable urban development. By fostering human-centric innovation, it contributes to shaping capacities for a just, low-carbon, resilient urban future, a cornerstone in the broader landscape of capacity building for transformative change. But before we dive into the event of today, let me introduce you to the Paris Committee on Capacity Building. Established at COP21 in 2015, the PCCB seeks to address current and emerging gaps and needs in the implementing and further enhancing capacity building in developing countries. To support the PCCB's mission and mandate, the committee launched the PCCB network in 2020 as a voluntary association of interested stakeholders engaged in climate-related capacity building. The PCCB regularly mobilizes the expertise of its network members at the regional level through PCCB regional thematic dialogues at the UNFCCC Regional Climate Weeks, through regular webinars and events throughout the year, but also at the international level through the Capacity Building Hub at COP. The Capacity Building Hub is a mandated event of the PCCB and takes place each year at COP, with this year as the fifth hub to take place. Its objective ultimately is to showcase the variety of capacity building efforts which have taken place over the year by sharing information, experiences, and technical capacities to further climate action on a larger scale. To learn more about the PCCB and its network, make sure to check out the two banners with QR codes that will redirect you to our web pages, which will give you more information. Now let me provide you an overview of today's program. The CapaCITIES Day will feature diverse sessions showcasing collaborative, human-centric innovation for urban resilience in the face of climate challenges. Engaging discussions by the UNU, EHS, and ICLEI will spotlight human needs-centered, agenda-centered, and demand-based approaches. The Climate Technology Center and Network will navigate building capacities to upscale transformative climate technologies, while Climats will delve into building resilience through nature-based approaches. The KCI will contribute valuable insights into just transitions with urban sectors. South-South-North will explore the realm of co-creation for urban resilience, and NABAT Consulting and CONE will introduce gamification techniques to promote urban sustainability. Alongside these discussions, a captivating photo exhibition, Co-Creating the Cities We Want, will visually underscore the power of arts to inspire a sense of global community and how people are working together to create a more sustainable and inclusive urban future. The day concludes with a high-level plenary session, distilling key insights and outlining a vision for implementation beyond the event. I would like to underscore that our sessions not only promise to be exciting, but also collectively address a range of cross-cutting issues, from action for climate empowerment to youth engagement, human rights, considerations for indigenous peoples, and gender inclusivity. Today's discussions are designed to be comprehensive. We will be delving into numerous approaches, spanning transformative technologies, nature-based solutions, and co-creation strategies, all with a central focus on building resilience for vulnerable communities. Importantly, the sessions actively promote gender equality and youth participation by engaging diverse stakeholders and involving various actors in the pursuit of resilient cities. The focus on human rights is intrinsic, challenging the status quo and instigating transformative shifts in existing systems. Additionally, the sessions resonate with the perspectives of indigenous peoples, placing emphasis on co-creation and addressing urban challenges, particularly in the global south. I extend my gratitude to our lead partners, UNU, EHS, and ICLEI. And now I invite Povre Saleh, Head of Urban Research, Innovation and Development Team of ICLEI. Appreciate it as well. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone here, and good morning, good afternoon to those who are with us online. It's an absolute pleasure to deliver the welcome note on behalf of ICLEI this year at the Capacity Building Day for Cities. As part of the 5th Capacity Building Hub at COP, we have the honor to support this program under PCCB First Committee for Capacity Building, hand in hand with United Nations University. And as the concept note suggested, but also Jairo sort of shared with us, this day is grounded in transformation with a focus on human needs. And we are very excited about all the sessions curated today, how we can talk about the capacities needed for this transformation that is happening, how we can put it at the scale and the speed that we need, but also addressing the climate change in the cities and moving beyond that and ensuring flourishing lives for the current and future 11 billion people. And for that, we have thought leaders in the room that I'm very excited to hear their perspective. And this is going to be a collected journey. And as Jairo mentioned, this is not only to talk about what we have done so far, it's also about what we are going to do in the next year and the years to come. So with that, I would like to thank you again for your participation, all the organizers and you wonderful experts. This is so exciting that we can have the exchange with all of you together. And I would like to pass the floor to my wonderful colleague, Simone Sandholz from United Nations University, who is a champion on many fronts. And she's been always inspiring for me. So thank you, Simone, for including us in you and Narjana and the PCCB team and the UNFCCC Capacity Building Subdivision team that are bearing the responsibility behind the scenes. So thanks, Eva and Rithi. Thank you.
Thanks, Buria. Good morning also from me. My name is Simone Sandholz. I'm leading the urban research in United Nations University. So thanks everyone for being here. Also thanks everyone who might be joining via the live stream for your patience. It's now all up and running. So as Buria said, we're super happy co-hosting this day because urban areas can and have to be changed. They have to be transformed to become more sustainable. And with that, that is very much determining how far this world is dealing with with climate change. So, Puri already mentioned the many exciting sessions we'll be hearing today, but besides all the sessions, As Jairo mentioned earlier, there's also a photo exhibition, which we see here to our side, because we felt we need to have something inspiring. Of course, any speaker here talking is extremely inspiring, but sometimes we also need visuals, and we need these visuals from different parts of the world to remind us what we are working for and why we're here at COP to do something about climate change. And without further ado, I would ask my dear colleague, Ariana Flores Corral, who's a communications analyst with United Nations University, and Laura Arevalos, who's a community referent in Buenos Aires in Villa Vente, which is one of the 5 urban labs we're working in. I'll explain later. To guide you through the reason why we did this photo exhibition and what is behind and what is shown. Please.
Thank you, Simone. Thank you, Puria. Thank you, PCCB. Thank you, Jairo. This is such a pleasure to be here with you today. Sadly, for the people that are in the live stream, you are not able to see the amazing photo exhibition we have here. But this photo exhibition is exciting, it's inspiring. It came from a photo competition we did in June, together with the PCCB, and well, as part of the Transformative Urban Coalitions project. So just some numbers so that you understand the amazing job that was done through here. We had 534 photos from people from 16 years old to 72 years old, from 51 countries, many, many cities around the world, showing how to build communities together, how to co-create, how to learn, how to strengthen capacities. We had a beautiful and esteemed jury that was formed from UNFCCC colleagues, from the PCCB. Puria here was one of the jury members too, but we had also Oscar Award winner filmmakers, we had a National Geographic explorer. All of them looked into these 534 photos and selected these beautiful 24 photos that are now shown here. This is important for us because transforming our cities cannot only be from the research and science and policy perspective, but also from the people. And the people are working on beautiful and super inspiring already, and are working collectively to do something to change our cities. And well, these photos show what's the power of the collective action. How do we care for our cities? How do we transform our cities? How do we shape our communities? We have people planting mangroves, people caring for their water bodies, people that are using bicycles. We have everything, and everyone is doing something to change our world. So, well, we also want to thank this photo exhibition was done with support from the German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action. We thank them for the opportunity to share these ideas. And, well, for the people that are here at COP, please come and visit our photo exhibition. I want to introduce Laura Arevalo. She is a friend and community referent from Villa Vente in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And she can talk about a small second part of this exhibition that has also beautiful 6 photos. And she will tell you a little bit more about that side of the exhibition.
Hello. Thank you, everyone, to be here. I'm Laura. I'm from Villa Veinte in Buenos Aires City. And I like to share with you all these photos that shows every work that we made in the neighborhood with all the people. And we want to communicate the work that we done every day in the neighborhood. We want to show that everyone cares about the neighborhood, about the people, about the environment. And this is super special work that we done every day in the neighborhood and in our city.
So please, whenever you have 5 minutes pass by, take a look at the pictures and let us know what you think. There's also some QR codes to do like a survey that will help us understand what's your view of a sustainable city. So thank you so much, and I'll pass it to Simone, back to Simone, so you can actually listen to the experts here.
Thank you. Well, there's more experts, as you can imagine. So, exactly. So we're now shifting actually to a very nice panel discussion on empowering transformative urban action for and by communities. Now I would ask my panelists to come on stage. So we have Delfina Matarazzo, who is working with the Housing Institute of Buenos Aires, Roshni Nugahali, who is with a very exciting NGO in India, Yuva, but she'll introduce us to us in a second, Puriya Salehi, whom you already know from his introduction from ICLE. Sorry, Rogier, who is the Global Director of the WI-ROS Center for Sustainable City, and my colleague Andrea Ramirez, who is a Senior Researcher with UNU EHS. Thanks all for getting up that early and for now providing us some very interesting insights. And I would want to start from Delfina. We've just heard Laura, who is also working in Buenos Aires. So actually, this is one of the cities my institute and also Rogier and the World Resources Institute are actively working in to support local climate action. But obviously, the city of Buenos Aires and also IVC, the Housing Institute, is already doing a lot. And the photos, but also your day-to-day work show the need for this local climate action. And so maybe you can share a little bit, what are you doing to support these upgrading processes? What are you doing to care for the people that are partly living in surroundings and in conditions that need some more support, and particularly in Villavente?
Hi, does this work?
Sorry.
No, sorry, it works, right? Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation and being here, and thanks to all of you that came to the panel and for those who are live streaming. As Laura said, we are working in Barrio 20, which is one of the slums in Buenos Aires City. Buenos Aires City has about 300,000 people living in slums. So as we all know, this type of neighborhoods get the worst from climate change and have the worst perspectives and the worst, the worst things about climate change. And what we're doing in terms of integrating these slums to the city is working in 3 areas at the same time. So we work not only from an urban perspective, but also from a housing perspective and a social economic perspective. And the important part is that as the government, we work with the community. So we understand that in order to change cities and in order to create more resilient and sustainable cities, we have to work with the communities that live there. The entire process that we're creating, we have been working in it for about 8 years, so it's an ongoing process. The Transformative Urban Coalition started 3 years ago and it's ongoing as well, so that climate change perspective also came to the project a few years ago. But what we are working in is how to create better cities, how to integrate these types of neighborhoods which have a lot of deficiencies, which don't have access to public services, which don't have access to mobility, to public transport, to good health conditions, which their houses don't have ventilation, illumination, good isolation conditions. What we're working is how to create better conditions, how to change this perspective with the community and supporting what they have already been doing, given the government perspective and the academic and the science perspective, to that project that was ongoing. So we believe that the voice of the neighbors is really important. We believe that having a participatory process only creates better conversations. We are here at the building hub, at the capacity building hub, sorry. And creating new capacities isn't only about learning new tools. It's also about the conversation that this type of processes and this type of projects creates. So understanding one another, hearing one another, and how this conversation only enhances projects to create better cities, to create more sustainable and more resilient cities. And that's a big point of what we're doing in Buenos Aires.
Thank you so much for sharing it, and we definitely come back to that later on. I want to now turn to Roshni, who is, can I say, working on a very comparable topic, making cities a better place for people, but on a different continent, in India. So you're the global director of UVA, and if I could ask the colleagues to put on the other presentation then, because you even brought us some very nice pictures as well. And I also want to pass this on. So you're working in different cities across India, and I can already see you're working on people's climate action, and you're very much also empowering youth and informal communities, both very much needed, and we couldn't all agree more. So tell us a little bit on how you're doing it. What is your approach, and how do you bring in the youth?
Thanks, Simone, and thanks for the invitation to be here. I think I'm representing UVA, which is a 40-year-old organization working on issues of housing and informality of labor in Mumbai, but also other cities in India. And I'll try to represent the work of many, many young people who've actually, put in a lot of time, energy, and their heart and soul into working on climate action in the city of Mumbai. And this is a map of actually part of Mumbai, and you can see how, the community is really looking at an informal settlement called a basti, which is what we, like a slum. And I'll tell you a bit of a narrative, a story of how the basti is trying to transform in the context that we're in. Just very quickly, not to look at the IPCC definitions, but for us, climate justice is actually a lens and an approach that tells us that there is imbalance. And it's really because of that imbalance that any action we have to take has to recognize the power. And that means we have to move beyond just tree planting or plastic cleanup, which is very, very popular. It's easy, it's optics friendly. So I think that's really the approach that we need to go towards. And whereas our entry point has been housing and informality, the work in the climate, we've sort of divided into, we've tried to bring in rigor as a civil society, a small NGO, looking at mapping, climate's hazard mapping, vulnerability assessments, and a community climate action plan. So I'll briefly take you through that. Very quickly, Mumbai is a mega city, and it has the worst of the worst, whether it's heat, flooding, cyclones, landslides, air pollution. Like, we have everything against us, like similar to Buenos Aires and other cities as well. And I think the first thing when we started working is that the lack of actual rigorous data there was a lot of anecdotal evidence of flooding is happening and, bastis are getting impacted, but exactly where, why, what. So the first step we decided to do is really hazard map and using existing mapping tools, but overlaying it with informal settlements. So whether that was heat, whether that is flooding, whether that is air quality, landslides, really looking at a very detailed mapping process, which told us where climate impacts were the highest and overlaid that with the bastis. So that really gave us an understanding of which communities were the most impacted beyond just, newspaper articles or media articles. So this was a very, very important step for us. This was done in-house, and I think it's something that can be done in-house, even in other organizations. And using that, we were able to really narrow down on a few bastis where the impacts were felt the greatest, where all the layers really hit the hardest. One of those was Ambujwadi, which is a slum of more than 50,000 people. And whether it was the climate indicators, impacts were the highest, as well as the social indicators. So you see that how that actually always seems to overlay. The communities which have the worst impacts of climate are also the ones which have the worst social impacts. And here we work with young people because we have youth collectives in this basti to really look at a vulnerability assessment. There are several options out there. We did a we did something which was, participatory, and, young people actually started using the climate hazard map of their basti, dividing that into 8 sections, and using that to really understand if flooding is happening, what are the nuances, what are the impacts of that flooding on people, and in a very nuanced and a granular way, rather than just saying, flooding, the community is getting flooded, because when that happens, maladaptation tends to happen. Somebody will build a wall, they will say, lift, raise your home, but that really doesn't work. So young people using mapping tools, again, this is demystification of these whole planning processes, which is possible. We've seen that happen. And through their vulnerability assessment, they actually came up with 10 themes, which very interestingly, you can see them are very linked to habitat. So for informal settlements, climate impacts is very, very core linkage is with habitat and then informality of their work. And that's an important finding that young people themselves realize. And then it's not theoretical anymore. It's something very live. And just quickly moving from the assessment to the action plan. This is a map of the basti. And you can see these are, one of the themes was the toilets team. So these are some of the toilets which are the community toilets. There are no private toilets here. Which are non-functioning, existing. And when they overlaid that with actually the hazards map, you could see which are the toilets which are, for instance, if you look at the boxes in blue, there are some toilets which are located on swamps, which have been made on reclaimed land. So obviously when flooding happens, these are the ones that are going to go, they're going to sink deeper. Similarly, there are some toilets where used to overflow a lot because the septic tanks are not enough. We need to connect those toilets to the sewage drain. So from the blue, which was a vulnerability that they found, if you look to the yellow, those were the action plans that they came up with. So very granular, very point by point, they were able to say that it's not enough to just randomly put toilets wherever, there's free space, but we have to actually have an integrated plan and map it with the hazards to see that that's really not the place, that big flooding point that you can see on the right, that's not where you put toilets, because obviously that's, not going to work. And then the action plan is something that the young people and their communities have developed. Then they're taking that, through memorandums, working with the local government, and when you show these kinds of maps, it's very, very empowering for young people and the community, and even your administration has really been very positive in terms of saying that we understand that this is connected with local land use planning, and how do we actually look at holistic solutions. And because this is something that Mumbai is 60% urban poor, we can also create city-level coalitions, which has been happening. We're also working with, actually, WRI and another community looking at nature-based solutions and open spaces. So this is something that can really move beyond. This is a meeting with the ward official, with just the young people, like nobody from Yuva is here. And I think that's really showing how empowering this sort of work can become. Finally, implications for the future. This is something that can go to other settlements, is going to other settlements, other cities. And I think looking at integrating with what is legal in the city, land use planning, climate action plans, which is becoming big in India and other countries as well. If basti level adaptation and coping can be linked in a very rigorous way with climate action plans, that's really very important. In Mumbai, we have the climate action plan developed by WRI. We're trying to work with them to really integrate urban poor issues there. And also, I borrow from Leila Mehta, who's at the IDS Sussex, who calls these a tapestry of micro efforts, which can then, add on, if you imagine a tapestry, to a much larger transformation. So I don't think we discount this tapestry. I think that's very important. And finally, people-centered work takes time, can be messy. This work took us about 8 months to 12 months, but it's really the only kind of work that will start shifting the power, that imbalance that I showed in the beginning, and really creating a bigger impact. So a big, an argument and a call out for investing time, energy, and money in financing, especially in this kind of work. Yeah, so thanks.
Thank you so much for this very, very passionate work. Awesome. Thank you so much, Rajni. That was very inspiring. And I think the last slide we could even already take as the summary and takeaways of the day. So we borrowed it. No, very exciting. And we could already see that, thanks for throwing in the word climate justice, but also coalitions, and then this togetherness, and then developing things really from the bottom with the youth and others. I would now want to zoom out after these two examples from Latin America and India, where we probably could already see some similarities and some potential to really also learn from each other. And I want to go to the global perspective, for which we have representatives of both ICLE and WI here, and I'm now changing the sequencing slightly because I know Ruchia has to sneak out for a conflict in a few minutes. Anyway, so Ruchia, the World Resources Institute and particularly the Ross Center, you're very strong international advocates for very ambitious urban climate action, but what exactly does it take to make such action transformative, to really have the lasting change at that depth that we also need, and particularly for the most vulnerable living in cities?
So thank you for having me on the panel, and thank you for the collaboration and the German government for making this transformative urban coalition project possible. Your question is the most difficult one that I faced in my entire professional life working on cities. So I'm not going to give an answer, but so the Ross Center for Sustainable Cities, this is actually our key question, right? I think it's an evolving, it's a process in which we continue to learn at different levels of that we are operational. But I can, of course, say a couple of things, right? So what is transformative change, and how can it kind of be really contributing to kind of elevating the most vulnerable and making them part of kind of the economic benefits and the urban benefits that cities offer. So first of all, let's not be, and I think Rosny, you actually said it all, but first of all, transformative change comes with an impact to the day-to-day lives of people, right? This is not something very abstract. So how can we really change something? And we've seen, and this is why for us it's so important to be really present in the counties. You know, I have the opportunity to sit here, but change happens in the counties, in the cities, or in the communities. Laura is an example of how community leadership can really unlock a lot of kind of powerful impacts. The pictures that we saw on the climate action plan, how you bring coalitions of people together. So there's an extreme amount of knowledge and power and will to change in communities at all different levels in all different contexts. It takes a lot of time and effort to kind of unlock that and organize that. And sometimes you have natural leaders that drive that themselves, and sometimes communities need support because people have a very busy lives and they need to kind of take care of their livelihood. So first of all, there is that energy, there is that opportunity, but it also needs to come with a payback, right? If you don't see change, there's no coalition of the willing at no level of society that will continue to sustain if you don't see change, or if it doesn't kind of enter into something sustainable with the support and not only the support, but with the acknowledgement of the community, of that power of community and coalition. And I think what you showed in your presentation is very important. I think it was in your last concluding slide, is that if you drive action in a community, and if you kind of show that knowledge and help to develop planning, that piece or that part of planning should be part of kind of official planning procedures and investment procedures. And I see in India, but also in Latin America and in Africa, that is really problematic. So there is still a large part of society, leadership, national governments, city authorities that look at the city as there is a formal part of the city. Well, the city is actually the formal part of the city. While we see that many cities, and especially rapid growing cities, for 50% are consisting out of kind of informal, disenfranchised communities, and everything in between formal and the informal, right? Informal economy. So it's very important that we start to take that, to look at that as the city of the future, right? And it's very dangerous, these events here that we are all together are very dangerous. We talk about the future of cities, and we're talking about energy efficiency and the more energy efficient buildings, but the true future of the city lies in where we see kind of the informal, and that's problematic. So I don't know how much time I have, but let me finish my thoughts. I wanted to say something different, but your slides kind of triggered this response. So I think so what we've seen in how we go about changing and unlocking the opportunity is to bring the community action planning and help to bring that into a process of kind of formal investment and formal planning. Our research, over the last 6 years, we've done research on the access to cities. And you see that if you look at developing an equal city, an equitable city, access to services and urban services is key. And we've seen that 1.2 billion urban dwellers in this world don't have access to urban services, to water, to energy, to affordable housing. And that's really stunning, right? So if you're in a city, but you don't tap into this kind of what we call this urban dividend, it's a real suffer. So a successful city, a transformative city, a transformative district is there where everybody has access to these services. And you can unlock that community planning and linking that community planning, that energy that sits in the community to formal planning and investment processes. And let me I wanted to say a lot more, but before I start to monopolize this, because this is one of the topics that I'm maybe most interested in. But there are successes, right? Every year we have the prize for cities, and we invite transformative projects and cities to apply. And every year we get, from everywhere in the world, we get around 260 submissions. It gives us a very good insight on the transformative capacity of cities, of neighborhood, of communities. And in 2020, 2021, the winner was Rosario, in the city of Rosario in Argentina, and you are very much familiar to that. And it's very interesting to see how a coalition of the willing, how a movement around food production, urban agriculture, turned into a urban strategy for the city. So in the wake of the economic crisis in Argentina in 2001, there was a group within Rosario that started to repurpose land, to look at urban agriculture, but there was a small movement. And that developed further and eventually became a driver for kind of sustainable development, sustainable urban development of the city. So repurposing unused land, creating urban agriculture opportunities, creating marketplaces, with that actually making a much more kind of resilient city footprint, right? With the opportunity to retain and absorb water and to kind of create actually a more green and pleasant environment, and also kind of reducing supply chains of food, so also helping on the actually climate footprint of the city. And it's a very good example how a movement of a small coalition of extremely dedicated entrepreneurial people turns into a planning dogma of a city and a town, addressing climate through something, and again I want to say, through something that changes the day-to-day lives of people. You get a more green city, you get better food, you create educational programs, you can make a living, and now these days 2,400 families are kind of operational in this kind of structure of urban agriculture in the city. And I think well, these are success stories that we want to illuminate through the prize, and this is transformation at heart.
Thank you so much, Rogier. So that was, I can imagine how hard it also might be to then select the winners, but it's also showing how many great and inspiring initiatives there are in cities across the world, and how one can learn from the other, at least by being inspired and seeing what is possible. And you said coalition of the willing, and that probably applies to the very local, but also up to the international, because also if cities are cooperating, we can't force them into it, but we also see more and more networks, more and more topics and initiatives. You just launched one or were part thereof in the last days, the Champion Initiative, but now also ICLE is a global network of cities and local governments, obviously. So you're like the global head or the global lead in ICLE, or ICLE is the global lead, bringing these cities together. Having this global perspective, where do you see that benefit of including communities, and where do you see the link? How do you support these cities into integrating their communities, into being more integrative and transformative, and how can then these cities, but also their inhabitants, benefit from such a global network? How do you bridge between the very local and the international?
Thank you so much for the question. That's a billion-dollar question, isn't it? No, this is wonderful. Going from very local level, case from Latin America, case from India, and then Roger sharing the and making the connection between research and also the work that is taking place. Particularly, I really like that angle of informal and formal versus the current administrative boundaries versus what is actually cities or communities. Sometimes when we are using the word citizens, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that, because there are other people that are not living in cities, but they are part of our communities, and we need to take them into consideration. So in response to your question, I would like to sort of break it down to 4 little pieces. One is about climate change and redefining that as an existential threat. Coming to inequalities that our colleague also mentioned, that going to a little bit definition of transformation and what is needed, and bringing this lens of human needs perspective and 11 billion flourishing lives, and then going to capacities needed and how brain science can a little bit support that. So let us start with climate change. We know that based on the 2023 emissions gap report, if all the unconditional nationally determined contributions are realized by 2030, the world will be on track to limit global warming to 2.9 degrees. And if all the unconditional ones are fully and successfully implemented, then we are on track to put the global warming to 2.5 degrees, right? While we were hoping to limit it to 1.5 degrees. So the gap is clear. And it's great that we have scientists and processes to be able to measure, although the probability is not 100%, still it gives us some sort of level and understanding that where we stand today and what is needed. But then when we look into the solutions implemented, oftentimes you see that some solutions may actually exacerbate the inequalities within the cities. And that is a wake-up call for us, in the sense that we should not take only climate lens when it comes to tackling the challenges, but also looking into other aspects of sustainability, one of them being inequalities in social development. And then I believe that transformation is taking place already, but it's really important to A, put it at the speed and the scale that is needed, and B, direct it to a direction that is not only answering to climate emergency, but also improving the life of citizens in a very tangible way. And that's exactly where this human needs-based perspective comes into consideration. And what do we mean by human needs? Human needs perspective allows us to take a step back, zoom out, and ask fundamental questions that the type of transformation that we are encouraging and implementing and supporting in cities, is it actually only addressing a given challenge? Or is actually looking beyond that one sector or one problem that we are looking into that? Take the example of transport. I really love this because it's very tangible for all of us. When we look into transport as a means of moving from A to B, then sure, we will look into electric vehicles. We will look into how we can, reduce traffic congestions, which I don't even find congestion a really good proxy when it comes to transport, because some cities might allocate a lot of lands to highways and streets, as you can see here, and then there's no traffic congestion or not really that serious. But is it actually a sustainable way of living? But when we change the narrative from a human needs perspective and say, well, why do we need transport? So transport is not our need. Access to something is a human need. It's access to food, access to health, access to education, access to entertainment, you name it. And when you look into that from that perspective, then we have a plethora of options that can open up the space for new type of innovations that could be truly transformative. We witnessed that during the pandemic, that a lot of type of solutions that we thought, oh, might not be really feasible, it became feasible. I was reading the report from Harvard Business School that before the pandemic, in Western Europe and Central and North America, only 15% of the people had experienced work from home, while during the pandemic, it hit 70%. So it's a massive change happened over short term, because the demand was there, and we needed that this needs to happen, right? So if the demand is there, this kind of dramatic and drastic shifts can happen, and therefore we really need to ground this transformation, this whole notion of transformation on the human needs to ensure that the experimentation happening and the innovation that happens doesn't reinforce the existing systems, doesn't optimize the existing systems that are not really designed for the needs of today. Today, we are dealing with increasingly complex systems that I'm afraid saying even urban systems, because Roger flagged that point, and I mentioned that how much it is important to see that it's like, what do we mean by cities? What is that boundary exactly? What about other sort of jurisdictions, other groups, other aspects, and informalities and uncertainties? But this will bring us to this point that sure, now we need to ground the transformation that is happening based on the human needs, and that's exactly where like we are excited to look into what cities are doing currently, what we are calling it meeting cities where they are. We have City of Buenos Aires here, right? And I don't think we have yet communicated this to you, but with Mission Innovation and UNFCCC Global Innovation Hub and our partners, we have developed an AI-powered platform that the thought leader is sitting in the back of the room, Dennis Pamlin, in terms of articulating the human needs and solution leadership. And we analyzed 101 cities, strategies, and documents. Because you can verbally commit to many things, but what matters is actually in your strategies and documents. And guess what? City of Buenos Aires by far stood first among all those cities in terms of how they have taken human needs into consideration and solution leadership in their resilience strategy. So this means that like we are meeting them where they are. We would like to see like how they are doing, what was the thought leadership behind that they ended up designing this strategy and grounding their work on that. What other cities can learn from them, what capacities they need to deliver on what they have envisioned in their strategies, and how we as international organization, in this case as a global network of cities, can really bring to the table to capacitate those jurisdictions and local governments to really deliver on what they have promised to. And then the last word is about brain science, which I'm so sort of passionate about it, looking into that. Again, there's an ongoing work with Mission Innovation and Brain Science Alliance that is very inspiring. And it's about why we are not really getting where we need to. We all are aware of like climate change issues, talking about climate emergency, inequalities, and all of that. But what is happening in our day-to-day life? And this is the reality that we are living in a world that consumerism is being promoted through different policies and practice, from businesses to governments, local governments. We are heavily sort of dopamine-based. We are becoming a dopamine sort of oriented communities, and the reason is we are wired to prefer instant gratification as opposed to delayed gratification, right? And we want something that like makes us feel pleased. That reward neurotransmitter is playing a big role in our decisions. And what we need is, we really need to change this narrative and put in place the type of policies that promotes the longer term vision that is based on our longer term goals. Oftentimes, the short term benefits of our unsustainable practices, such as economic development or comfort or convenience, outweighs the long term unsustainable results. Like, we know that taking a car isn't sustainable, but it's cold and it's much easier and it's more comfortable, so we do that. Or this example from Dennis that always talks about it, like we use public transport and all of a sudden we double the size of our wardrobe, right? So brain science comes into play here in the sense that how we can ensure the change starts from individuals, from a family, a neighborhood, a community, all the way up to the global level. And our role as ICLEI in this context, and we are very passionate, is how we can really bring this narrative into the exchange and make sure capacity building activities happens around that perspective with a focus on human needs, and making sure that cities will learn from each other and we move away from best practices to next practices based on what is needed. Thank you.
Thanks, Puria. That was a perfect segue to our fifth and last speaker, Andrea. Because you said we need to meet people where they are and need to also build capacities. And for that, we do not only need to consider then the like the city government perspective, but also the community perspective, right? And what needs to be done there and what capacities and support might be needed there, as we've been shown very beautifully by Roshni and Delfina. So over to my colleague, Andrea Ramirez from United Nations University, where she's a senior researcher, but also responsible for capacity building and assessing the needs for capacity development and capacity sharing in the project that was mentioned earlier on the Transformative Urban Coalitions project under the International Climate Initiative of the German government. And there you're very much engaged, as I said, in these 5 urban labs in Latin American cities. So can you tell us a little bit about the core needs for capacities that you have identified and where you see the biggest demand, and how can this be met? What are then also the formats?
Thank you very much, Simone. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, wherever you are, or good night. It's very nice to be here and listen to all these stories and how we all speak about the same at the end from a different perspective. So for me, this conversation started with Delfina telling us that conversations on the ground in Buenos Aires are very important. And then I immediately related to Noelia, the person who took the first picture on the right side of our panel, when she was telling us how, through the camera, she started to notice the needs of her community. And after our training in photography, she decided to do a photo book of the people on the ground. And she's very happy now with the exhibition, and telling everybody, you know, I'm at COP, please tag me, but also tell them that I'm bringing a book back to the territory. So for me, capacity development is not only a result, as we are talking today, but it's also a process, as Roshini, you were mentioning. It's a process of understanding and seeing from a different perspective. For me, it has been a pleasure translating what is the local perspective on the ground. For us, climate action with social justice means working together with everybody, but also means learning from everybody. So we don't speak about capacity building, we speak about knowledge exchange, in the sense that we can be sharing talents and stories and narratives that could tell us much more about who they are and who are they aiming to be in the future when these pressing and urgent demands are solved. So in this process, through TUC, we started with Buenos Aires and this front-runner effort of leading participation in a very open way and participatory way in which Delfina is involved. But then we come to the other processes in Mexico where there is a more top-down approach, and we have a different perspectives, and the people is mainly saying, oh, we need physical changes. This is what we need on the ground. And then when you question more, okay, what does it mean for you, physical changes? Well, in Naucalpan and León, this means urban gardening. And what does it mean? Oh, I would like to know which plants are best for my territory. How can I have a community garden in the middle of the city, in the case of León, that can provide also food for our neighbors? So the neighborhood is not fragmented anymore, and the people can come here and they don't believe my neighborhood is dangerous. So these kind of stories that are inspiring, not only taking a course that could be very boring or be very difficult to take when you have so many needs, could be also fun. And this is my point. Capacity development and capacity exchange for me has been a way of thinking out of the box and questioning myself, how can we make climate action and social justice being more creative? And this is our effort through transformative communications. And also what we are doing on the ground with Brazil that is beyond communication. How can we alleviate poverty and their effort on the ground trying to make recycling materials? And you will see in our exhibition some basic products that the women were arranging, trying to think, okay, now that we have the tools, now that we know climate, now that we are learning about circular economy, what can we bring back? And finally, well, my point is this. Capacity development is an exchange in which bring it back to the community, this recognition in which they can be identified as change makers and can understand that this engagement and this empowerment comes also in a meaningful way, not only in the way of the project is served or the city objectives or the global climate objectives, but the life purposes is served. That will bring us very nice success stories in the long term. So I'm very happy to see that in my research, the needs that were 52% related to physical changes, these needs were transformed in 1 year or were documented as different expectations. And now we are talking about, I want tools that help me with commitment on the ground, to help me build trust with my community. So this movement or this shift from physical changes, expectations to social changes inspires me as well, because I think climate action without social perspective is very difficult to translate on the ground to the people, but also it is more creative and it is tougher to think, okay, what kind of capacity development can we offer related to commitment that it's really engaging, but that also can transform urban communities and climate action. So this is my story. I will be all these days here in the hub, so it will be my pleasure to tell you more on the process of daily action on this. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrea. So you know where to find her to reach out. And with an eye on the time and knowing there's more panels to come, maybe we close with a very quick round of just, if you could name me one kind of capacity that we should have a training, we should have something on for empowering urban communities to act on climate change. What would be a topic or even a format that we're lacking so far, or that you find most important? I know that, for instance, WI and also ICLE already have a lot of formats, but is there anything we should still do more on, or need to reach more, that need to find a way how to reach more people? Maybe we start, Rosny, because you were nodding so much. Can we start from you?
No, it's a very good question. I think for us, what would be most important is some support and, engagement in root causes. Like if I'm experiencing, what are the root causes? What are the systems that are causing this, and not just there's rain, there's a flood, there's pollution, So I think if communities get that critical root cause analysis, then whatever change happens will be driven by that and not by surface level. So I think somehow demystifying and making that simpler.
Thank you.
If I can continue, going with Roshi, what she was saying, I think also based on what you talked about, the diagnosis of these types of communities is really important. We as urban planners tend to do diagnosis from the desk. So we know how to build data, we know how to create maps, we know how to understand from our perspective what the problems are. I think what needs to be built up is how to make those diagnoses on the ground, how to listen to the people that live there, understand their necessities, but not only from the government perspective, which is what I work at, but as an equal perspective, because we all want a better city. So that conversation needs to be on the ground in territory, and with that conversation, create new urban plans.
Maybe we follow the line, Furia, then we're here, and ending on Andrea.
Sure, happy to do that.
Sorry.
I think we can give different answers, but I really like the way Roshni set the scene for that, looking into root causes as opposed to only events and patterns in a full iceberg approach, which then it goes to the fact that there's a need to this mindset shift and then re-envisioning what we want in the future, setting new goals. You know, we are at the midpoint of SDGs, and we know already that we haven't achieved SDGs. Like I was reading SDG progress report, for example, in Asia and Pacific, the overall progress is 14.4%, as opposed to expected 50%. So we know we already need to think about post-SDGs, for example, so how it should look like, and that's where this very great point of root causes comes into place. And I think if we could ground it on the human needs, then we have a way forward on that front.
Thank you.
Yeah, I stick to my acknowledgement and reward. That is absolutely what needed. So there's power in the coalition, there's power in the community. And I really love, so for me, the photo exhibition is much more than nice pictures on the wall, right? Because climate talks can be very complex, and they are very complex, and they become very abstract. But in the end, it's about, you know, real change. And climate action is great, right? It offers cleaner air, it offers green community, it offers solutions for waste management, it offers clean energy, cheaper energy. It's a whole, we can change this movement, but acknowledge that, you know, I love the postcards that you find in your chairs, right? So these are all brothers, sisters living in different urban contexts, an acknowledgement of what's needed to make sure that we develop cities in which everybody is included and everybody has access to services. That I think that's the sort of the baseline needed for implementing everything that we're talking here about. Right?
Thank you.
I really think it's a matter of combining all the capacities that we are aiming for, as I agree with all of you, but also I think it's about having the power of offering local stories in the global context, because these stories or these capacity building are amplified when the people relate to the story. So for a participant, maybe in Latin America, to hear that in India they have the same challenges, but they solve it also through mapping, or they solve it through photography or through communication, I think this is what creates a network, and not only and that is not led only by global big partners, but by the community members themselves or local governments themselves. So my suggestion in terms of capacity is the power of combining synergies, combining products. There are a lot of efforts already on the ground, but we need to talk more between us and provide opportunities for the people to get in touch with similar stories, but maybe in other contexts. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to this great panel. Give them a round of applause, please. Thank you so much. Don't leave. We're just continuing reassembling, and Purya will take over from now on. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much.
Happy to do that, and thank you so much, everyone. So without any further ado, let's continue this conversation, and this nicely brings to the second conversation on the opening plenary, which I would like to ask beloved Simone to stay on the panel and ask our moderator, Dr. Dennis Pamela, the Executive Director of Innovation, and one of my favorite exemplary local leader, Councillor Alison Gilliland. Thank you so much for making time to join us. It would be great to have you on the panel as well. And Alejandro Kilpatrick, hello. Alejandro, it would be great if you could join us on the panel, as we are very excited to hear. Thank you for joining us. To hear your insights about this work. So, Dennis, I would like to yield the floor to yourself, and we can take it from there.
Thank you. Do I have my slides, or? Thank you, Purya. Yeah, so now we're going to shift perspective a little bit and take a step back and discuss what is a city and what is climate action. And from a very simplistic way, my fear has been that much of the work in cities is a copy of the old way of thinking when it started to work with climate change in relation to business. For those of you who were part of the early days in the 90s, the big challenge then was we had a world that denied climate change. The big companies in the world said climate change is not a real thing. The Global Climate Coalition that came to Kyoto denied climate change. The big fossil companies said this is not the case. What we did then, at that time I was at Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace, etc., with environmental NGOs, we said we need to break these companies open and start for them to realize that they can start reduce emissions. These big problems. And that's the kind of structure that we created. We created the CDP, we created the greenhouse gas protocol, etc. Everything with the idea that companies are problems that don't want to reduce emissions, and we need to force them open and have them comply with the reduction agenda. That's not bad, but that's a very small part of the world. There are many companies, collectives, and other things that try to push solutions also. And there are those, not the big coal companies and oil companies, and to basically be honest, they should die in their current form. And they need to be reshaped. But cities are something very different. So I've been quite sad to see that when you come here and talk about climate leadership among cities, it's about reducing their emissions. But that's not the purpose of a city, especially not a leading city. A purpose of a leading city, from my perspective, is to provide flourishing lives for its citizens and export those solutions and share those with the world. So for me, a leading city is more like a solar cell provider or a provider of healthy plant-based food. There's something that needs to grow, something that needs to be exported and shared among more people. But today we tend to view cities more like an oil company and say, how much do you reduce your emissions? Have you complied? Are you reporting including this, this, and this? And it's also within companies. No offense to all the sustainability people, but usually they are quite boring compliance people working with supply chain. They're not the people deciding where the company is heading. So we're using the tools of the people who work with compliance, not the people who work with strategy, and then we say to cities, use this framework. How much are you reducing your emissions? Have you set a target for reduction of emissions? Instead of saying, who have created the most flourishing lives? In a way that we can share those things. Where are you entrepreneurs? You know, these images for me, those are entrepreneurs. Those are the people we should not just look at what they do in that city, but how they share those experiences, because they are creating best and next practices for the world. So that's a little bit of my perspective on this. I don't know if the slide deck is ready, or, well, someone might give me a... It's a big file, they are uploading that. So that's what we've been doing now. We've been trying to create this, and much of my experience is working with solution providers, because my frustration in the business sector, and now I'm trying to see why can't we use those tools for cities? And my hope is that cities should actually lead this agenda on solution providers, because cities are built around not a narrow agenda of pushing things out on the market, but providing flourishing lives for people. That's why cities exist. So I hope that as we move forward, the kind of new tools and framework that develop is done by cities and then challenge companies to use the same. Instead of using the kind of reduction agendas, compliance agendas that were created for the big fossil companies, because that is taking us in a very strange direction. And that's also where I think this global perspective, and I know it's provocative, but I say that talking about reduction of emissions is almost a colonial thing. Because for most of the people in the world, the question is not reducing emissions. It's moving out of poverty and living flourishing lives without emitting emissions. And that's what we have had a very confusing world, because we were then saying we need to talk about avoided emissions. Because avoided emissions makes the poor woman in the global south equally important to the fat man in the north. Because if both are, the fat man is reducing his emissions by removing his SUV, but the poor woman is getting good lighting and better food and education. Both are avoiding emissions, but her emissions today are ignored because they're not part of a market, that we don't see it, etc. But the big white person who's removing their SUV is celebrated as a hero. But she's much more sustainable. So why is that the case? And that's what we say, that avoided emissions is much more important. And that's also, but the problem is that because we're so stuck in this old perspective, we think that avoided emissions is about buying offsets somewhere and claiming something. And we say, no, 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 that's now you're still there. So yeah, so if you see in this image that try to capture, it's not bad. Of course, cities need to focus on how they can reduce their emissions. But if we only do that, we are in what we call the static problem approach. And sometimes we jokingly said, that's the place for those who fight for fossil-free typewriters. That is basically saying we are where we are and we just reduce emissions. But what we say is we need to focus on human needs and who provides for those. And that's the expanded climate innovation agenda. So by all means, try to reduce your emissions. But if we focus on those with the big emissions instead of solution providers, and if we focus on the sectors emitting instead of human needs, we are not pushing the agenda forward. And I hope this is the last COP where we only have cities, companies, and countries that are seen as leaders if they reduce emissions. And that the next COP, at least COP30, where we have Brazil, will also welcome those who come with solutions, the kind of heroes what we have in this room. So, yeah, I'll skip through this because I've spoken long enough now. But our focus, as Perja said, in Mission Innovation, the Net Zero Compatibility Initiative, is to see how do we find solutions for more than 11 billion people. We are 8 today, but the coming decades we will probably be 11 billion. So we need to plan for that everyone on the planet can live flourishing lives. Not move out of poverty, not have less bad things, but dream of the world we want to have. Because if we don't do that, we allow the West to keep on saying, oh, but we're going to shift into biofuel private jets. Sorry. There's not room for everyone to fly those kind of things. We need to have a deeper challenge on how we provide those. You cannot buy a super yacht on 130 meters. There's too much natural resources if everyone should live flourishing lives. Or if you can find that super yacht, for doing that. But then you need to show that that is compatible, that everyone can live that life with that kind of resources. So we want to have a more fundamental discussion on how we share this planet resources in an efficient way and tap into that. So let me just go quickly through this, because we think that, as I said earlier, we focus on reducing emissions, but that's really the top of the iceberg. That's a rich people emitting lots of stuff. Most of the people, we should really talk about flourishing lives and how we avoid emissions. And that we need also to recognize there are different ways of getting there. The worst part, the P4, that is what we talk about today, the IPCC scenario. That is saying we're going to do what we have today, and then we hope that CCS will do things. And we will use a lot of natural resources. We will destroy biodiversity, we will keep people in poverty, we will be inefficient. But IPCC also had the P1 scenario, that is about the sharing, new business models, a shift from material consumption to experience. But we don't distinguish that, or many people in the business community don't want to do that, and many countries in the global north do not want to do that because that challenges them to a much deeper degree. So P1 needs to be a focus. And as I said, we should not just focus on reducing emissions, that the fossil-free typewriters, and we need to challenge, and this is where I want the conversation to focus. Of course, cities should reduce their emissions, but when you do that, as Perja said earlier, you then look at, oh, our cars are reducing polluting emissions. Let's make fossil-free cars. But we need to dig deeper. We need to ask, why are we driving those cars? If that is to buy fast fashion and then drive through for fast food, Everything is wrong with that, because you need healthy nutrition and you need empowerment from companies that help you to become the person you want to be, not people who want to sell you in this insecurity that is driving this. And I think that's, Perja mentioned that also one of our key features now is looking into brain science, and that we have mental pollution, especially in the global north, where dopamine is driving us. And if we don't address that fundamental question that people want to do things, look at New Year's Eve. People are wishing for a better world, but then they're confronted with a world that is pushing them to become short-term consumerisms. If cities don't acknowledge that and say citizens needs to be confronted, not just by consumption messages that your body's not good enough, your consumption is not good enough, but you also have things about caring, literature, learning, creation, being an artist, be a person that gives something to society, then we're lost. And that's what we talk about, this new city, and this new city agenda for flourishing lives. And that is not just about having buildings and nutrition. It's also about being an artist. It's also about being a creator, a scientist that gives something to society. We want all cities programs to allow people to give something to society. And that can be anything. But if we don't have that, we only have consumers, and that is not where we need to go. So I'll just end by showing some of these things that we had created, this toolbox. We allow cities also to scan themselves and say, are you looking for solution providers, or are you looking at those with problems? Are you looking at the kind of heroes you have here that give something to society, healthy nutrition, good ways of education, etc.? And are you looking at human needs? Or are you looking at the big sectors? So that allows us then to check what different cities around the world are doing. And many in the global south are leading this work because they focus on human needs. But many in the global north, they only focus on the static problem approach and saying, oh, we're just going to reduce emissions from our big polluters, then things are hunky-dory. But in the global south, people say, no, 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 we need to look at humans. We need to look at those people living flourishing lives because they struggle today. So that's where I think tomorrow's city and climate agenda will emerge from the global south to a much larger degree. So we should not talk about tech transfer from north to south. We should talk about idea transfer from south to north. And then we have lots of things. You can then say, if I'm a smaller city, if I'm a richer city, who do I compare with? So we can have these tailor-made tools that we learn from each other and discuss. And we see, top of the list, we have many from Brazil, South Africa, Ethiopia, are emerging as really interesting in this area, where you start to scan those. So these, when you look at many Western cities, they are white. They don't look at this at all. Their climate strategies don't even include human needs and solution providers. But there are gaps also that can be addressed. For instance, are they really thinking global? Do they have capacity to look at emerging technologies? That might be worth looking into. And what we do right now, and where I want to hand over to this panel also, is how do we then embrace, so we help people in different parts of the cities? Because if you look at the cities today, this is a bit hard to see, I guess, for you, but basically showing the gray part, that is the classic climate agenda. That is looking at you as a problem and how you reduce emissions. But we also look at the other parts of city strategies, innovation strategies, export strategies, where you focus on human needs and how you can share those to the world. But for most cities, it's not strategy. That's part of the innovation strategy. Export strategy, capacity building strategy. When we had our session a few days ago with Ethiopia, it was the Minister of Skills and Labor and the Minister of Innovation who welcomed this kind of approach, because that's how they work. So I'll just ask with that, and then because what we allow people to do then today, and would like to see, so the climate strategy goes in the gray box, but some of the innovations and visions go up there. So how do we help these cities not just to get stuck in the climate compliance, but this new expanded climate innovation agenda? And also look at how we help them to move beyond product substitution to system transformation. What is system transformation? That is much bigger challenge, as Priya was saying. It's not about shifting a car to an electric car. It's about asking, how do you have a mobility, the 15-minute city, etc. Deeper question about access to human needs. So I'll end that and say that we have also then what we're doing now with Priya and his team is saying, what are the things that people have done so people can say, what can I learn? How do I increase this so I can try to change my current climate agenda? Or do I increase or expand the scope of other agendas, that the export and innovation agenda? Or do I create totally new agendas? Is this something new, where we have new skill sets and new stakeholders that needs to be around the table? Not lawyers and compliance experts, but innovation, human needs, communication. I'm so happy because the storytelling about this future is probably one of the most important. So with that, I'll end by saying, please join us if you are interested. There are different working groups here now within cities to develop these kind of tools and to develop these kind of leaderships that we want to bring forward. Thank you. And with that, I'm the moderator. So with that, I don't know in what order. Do you have any specific order? That maybe I have
to leave at 20.
Then we'll start with you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation to be here. I really do love the human needs approach, and I think it's probably the only way that we are actually going to convince all of our citizens that we are in a crisis, that we need to adapt, we need to shift, and it will be a better world for you. We in the European Committee of the Regions and with my political colleagues did a Eat, Breathe, Live workshop, and we very much focused on food, air, mobility. And I loved the whole thing about the cars, because too much of the time we hear about we must shift to EV and we have to have EV chargers and the cities must put in all these EV chargers. No, we need accessible public transport, we need good cycle infrastructure, and we need more pedestrianised zones. The 15-minute city, if you could walk, cycle or get a bus to everything you need, you're going to live a wonderful life. You're going to have more time with your family. You're going to have more quality air, particularly if you put lovely greenery in those places. And it's going to be a much calmer life, both physically and mentally. And I think that's flourishing. From a city approach, I think our big challenge is, and I agree, it's not all about reducing, it's shifting. And it's changing our systems so that we have a multi-beneficial approach. And I think now we really do have an opportunity, because we have to pivot so forcefully that we can actually do a lot of good where we see the social needs, make a more equitable society. And I think from a European perspective, we've underpinned the European Green Deal with a just transition, with the principle of do no harm. Generally, the just transitions focus more on the sort of the coal mining areas, but I think it has to apply across the world, across every sector, particularly around agriculture. When I look at the Global South and we talk about biodiversity loss, and it's also happening in the Global North, so many people's incomes are directly linked to nature and biodiversity. And we, in the Global North, as a secondary link is our food systems. And I think we don't think about that enough. You know, you go into the supermarket and you buy your food, and you don't really think where it comes from, or the people that have put together, or the soil that it comes from. And in Dublin, is I think our third year, we do an Eat the Streets festival where we use food as a vehicle to communicate about climate, about health, and we get people to actually think about where their food comes from. even when they're going to a restaurant, we have a few restaurants that have signed up to a charter to only use local food, food in season, and there's a real movement, food movement happening. And actually the curator of some of the foods here is an Irish chef whose policy is zero waste. He uses absolutely everything, and he's one of our key people in that. Another area I see for cities in realizing this is facilitating that shift in consumption away from the retail, and you see a lot of it here. My worst nightmare is the Dubai Mall that I had to walk through to get to the metro one day. But shifting it to play, to nature, to recreation by, building municipal theatres, sports facilities, parks, playgrounds for children and adults. And I think if you have those on your doorstep, and you have more time because you don't have to have that longer commute, and your hospital and your school is within your area, you're going to use those more. So you're still consuming, but in a very low carbon way, but in a way that you're also interacting at a more human level and connecting with your neighbours. The system transformation is massive. It takes a lot of good planning, a lot of commitment. In Dublin, we have underpinned our city development plan with the concept of the 15-minute city. We've also introduced what we call community wealth building, very conscious that we have communities within our city that are less well off from a socioeconomic and environmental perspective. And we're very much conscious of when we are tendering out for public projects that we build in social clauses and that we place social projects in those communities. And finally, one of the economic models that I'm a big fan of is donut economics. And I think that social base, not going beyond the planetary boundaries, that sweet spot in the middle is where you flourish. And I think it's bringing down those 5% from the top and bringing up the huge amount of people that we have living in poverty for the bottom, and all of us living in more harmony, in a carbon, low carbon, healthy, sustainable city, planet, environment.
Fantastic. A round of applause for that. Because I think that is, and that for me it's also so shocking, because in a few days we will launch with the outdoor industry and the sports industry about them as solution providers. They've never been invited. But when we ask people, when do you live flourishing lives? They mentioned music. They mentioned being out with friends and eating good dinners. They mentioned being outdoors in nature. So, but those people are not here. Why don't we have them and say, how do you create that? Because you have a version, I love what you say, because we usually give that an example. If you bring your family to the mall and consumption, or out in nature, and discussing the beauty of nature and look at the star and how the world's working, that's very different worlds. But most people actually like the ones of being out in nature. But the people coming here are the people from the mall saying, oh, we're going to be less carbon somewhere in the future. But we already have lots of people working for that better future, but we haven't brought them here and say, how do we bring those people to the center stage? And I've been really shocked about that. And the people from the outdoor industry, they were shocked when I said, but why are you only looking at reducing your emissions? Why aren't you talking about how you are helping people get smarter wardrobes? And the wardrobes that encourage people to live smarter lives out in nature rather than consumption. That is your key contributions. Of course you should reduce your emissions, but it's that you're challenging the fast fashion or not identify with thousands of wardrobe items, and that you have that wardrobe telling you to be a consumer, but telling you to be someone who's connected with nature. So I love what you said in terms of this sort of living, breathing, eating, moving, and saying, what are the fundamental joys of life? So I don't know if you need to go now, but it was fantastic to have...
Sneak out at 20, I have somebody going to wave at me when I have to go.
Okay.
I'd love to hear everybody else's views.
So, your perspective.
Thank you very much, Dennis and Alison. Very, very exciting conversations. And I want to go back a bit to to the main subject matter of this hub and also this session, which is capacity building, capacity development, capacity enhancement. Everyone uses different words, but I think we're talking about the same thing. So maybe I'll start by extrapolating what we hear at the international level from what countries are saying about what they need in terms of capacities, but how can that relate to at the city level? And I think there are definitely connections there. So we're hearing, particularly from developing countries, that capacity building needs to be country-owned. There has to be ownership of capacity building. What does that mean? That those that will benefit from this capacity building or enhancement need to be part of designing what exactly they need. That's one part. The other is retention of capacities, and that's a big thing in terms of, and it's related to transforming how we do things. There's a tendency to do capacity building on a subject base for a limited amount of time, but how does that get retained at the individual institutional level? Another point is the fact of impact of all this capacity building support. And that's also part of this transformational shift. We have a model of capacity building equals training. And once people are trained, their capacities have been built. And we're seeing that's not the most impactful way of doing things. Because, yes, a few benefit, but what is the overall impact for the system, for the city, or for the group? So that's another point. And also the modalities, the traditional modalities of, doing capacity building by building, creating a group of people, doing a workshop, and having some slides, some teacher-like approach. That's something that is not, for the context we're living in, is not effective, the most effective way of doing it. So how do we link that to cities? I think it's similar. It goes back to what you were saying then, is that what is the ultimate objective? It's not necessarily building capacities on how to address climate change, is to look at what are the needs, and here's needs-based capacity building. And needs-based in the context that you want to develop or enhance those skills. So, and goes back to your point, it not necessarily have to be capacity enhancement on climate only. It's on what's important for people that has a benefit for climate. And I think that I really like the words transformation here, and I'm also a big fan of donut economics, and of course circular economy approaches, which are coming up more prominently, but also you need to see how they are catered to the actual needs of cities or in a specific context. So basically needs-based capacity development enhancement, and it has to go at all levels. And when talking about cities, and I think this is where this capacity enhancement development could be more around systems, how to, and it's about not saying this system was implemented in this country in the global north, we could implement it here in the global south. It's rather that this is a notion of a system that has shown it can work in a different context, but how can we adopt it in a local context? Think of, for example, circular economy approaches. And I think also capacity building enhancement is about engaging people the right way. Engaging all stakeholders, as you said, Dennis, is not the typical stakeholders, but all stakeholders that can provide solutions and bring solutions to others that can learn from them, and not just be a static, two-way directional capacity building. It's about sharing lessons. And I think something that I believe is very important is to keep in mind the purpose-focused approach. As you mentioned, people get excited when they see something that is contributing to a purpose. If it's a healthy life, if it's more time with your family, so that you have to factor in, and it's not out-of-the-box capacity development enhancement. So it becomes really challenging. And I think an area in cities coming more from the policy level is this capacity development enhancement at the policy level, but not. And cities, I think, have a benefit in terms of their administrative structure or governance structure that's different to national governments, maybe national governments are over-bureaucratized, cities might be more agile. And I think that's where targeting those policymakers in the city level together with other stakeholders, and I think that here the private sector is fundamental also. So I think it's about, when we talk about capacity development enhancement, it has to be really seen in the context of you're not providing capacity building, you're not a provider of capacity building, you are facilitating a mutual learning environment that can transform in solutions. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, fantastic. And I usually said, because I don't know if you've seen this, the PCCB's illustration, I think especially the first three ones are what I would like to see the whole climate conference focus on. What are the capacity gaps we have? Because very much now is about just putting more of what we have done. Increase the price of carbon or something. But no. Here, there's some more fundamental gaps, and I think that's why PCCB's role is so important. But also this collaboration. We need to think beyond the traditional stakeholders and think about, we usually talk about clusters, that you need to bring the academic, the local stakeholders, the international stakeholders, the private sector, the public together. That's the only thing. So much of this is divided into, say, here's the cities initiatives, here's the private initiative. No, here's the initiative delivering on human needs. And here are the different things. So there's where I think PCCB has a unique opportunity to bring that perspective to the forefront. But last but not least is the third one is what kind of information and knowledge is needed. Almost all data today, if you look at VIPOV, WTO, CCD, etc., it's usually product-based data that we have. Or sector-based. It's not human needs-based. So look at, I usually use Google as a good example. So they come to cities and say, hey, we can look at your transport. And now we know how people transport, so we know how you can shift from your cars to your electric cars. But no, you're not helping the city. You don't know why people are driving. The access to education, the access to childcare. You are locking our society in an old way of thinking. Not ill-intended, but because the data we have today is product-based, usually from companies who want to optimize their sales. That's not bad, but we also need a new generation of human needs-driven data. And that's what we hope to work with European Commissions and others, saying how do all the R&D programs, how do we get people to also bring in human needs data so we know this? And again, the Global South is usually further ahead because they know that the human needs are so fundamental to everything we do. In Europe, we tend to be more on, but how do we get the transport sector? And we have transport data and transport, instead of asking, how do we get access with 15 minutes? So please look at this framework that the PCB has, because I think it's not just about capacity building as one additional thing. I think it's something that needs to move into the very center of the climate negotiations, because we are leaving the old way, the 90s way of blaming. So I think this capacity building of a human needs-driven agenda is where that kind of framework being presented can really enter. And now, last but not least,
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm having an eye on the time because I know how difficult it is facilitating a session that needs to be ended in 5 minutes from now. Now, I think we've been talking a lot about human needs, and I couldn't agree more, but it's also about knowing what are human needs. I do know I need to breathe. I do know I need to drink water and have food and a place to sleep. But what about the needs I'm not even aware of because my daily life and reality doesn't permit me to be aware of it? If I'm born and raised in a place where, I mean, my basic challenge is to think about the next week or month or year, I don't even know what's happening elsewhere, and I don't know about the opportunities I might be having. So I would definitely urge us to see capacity building also in this sense, and that is where I understand also these approaches that have been presented and discussed up here. And I could also not agree more on the need to bring in more people and to deal with a systemic approach, but at the same time, systemic approaches have the challenge of being complex. So this world obviously is complex. We need to deal with the complexity, but we need to break it down into digestible bits and pieces. And one, I believe, beautiful piece of work that we could look at that could inspire us is a flagship report that my institute has launched a couple of weeks ago, the Interconnected Risk Report, that actually looks at 6 tipping points worldwide. I'm saying that because one of them is at least to a large extent urban. It's unbearable heat. In a couple of years from now, many cities in this world will become too hot to live in, particularly when it's coming to this mix of temperature and humidity. Probably the go-to solutions that are promoted right now are something like air conditioning, think about technological solutions, blah, blah. They will not bring us all the way. We need to think about other things and take the systemic approach. What are the root causes? What do we need to change right now so that we still can live a decent life in the future? And if I'm born and raised in a city like Dubai, probably my answer and thinking right now would be different than what I'm saying as someone who was born and raised in a little village in a remote place in Germany. So that's different realities we need to factor in. But if this isn't the place to bring them together, I don't know where else.
Fantastic. And I think this might be the most important question that is not really being asked. What are our real needs? Because the basic needs we know. We know we need to eat, we need some protection from the elements. But beyond that, and that's why we launched this collaboration, as Perja mentioned also, with the brain scientists, saying that we actually live in a society with mental pollution. We are triggered by fast fashion, fast food, etc., that are dopamine driven, and also social media. And that does something with all of us. And if we don't address that, and they talk about the green brain capital, how can we become reflective, think long-term, see challenges as opportunities to overcome rather than fear and polarization? And for only 10 years ago, that science did not really exist. So we hope that kind of knowledge can also be brought, and that's where we hope that we can form an alliance here with Alejandro's in his team also with his expanded innovation agenda and the kind of capacities, because his framework is what we've been looking for, but I think we might have some tools also and some collaboration that might be fruitful to join up forces in this work. So I don't know if anyone wants just a quick round then, because we're going to end up here. Maybe if you have to run, your final reflections on the next step. What do we need to do? Bring some hope to people.
It's always good to talk. And I think forums like this, and as Simone said, if we don't talk about it here, where we have the diversity from the globe to listen, to discuss, and as you said, the different contexts, I think that's really important. So I think you've made a really good start with the framework that you've introduced. You're getting it out there, but then it's getting people to do it, getting city leaders, urban leaders, regional leaders, national leaders, and bigger than that to actually do it. So that's our big challenge, but I think great start, Dennis.
Thank you. Alejandro.
Thank you, Dennis. Wonderful discussions, and I think my key points is needs-based, and I take on Simone. So talking with capacity building, real needs-based, not, I think these are your needs. No, what are your needs? Context is important. I'm from Mexico City. My needs are different. I mean, it's about transport, for example, but in other cities it's different. So I think that's one part. I think also the link to education, and I think that's where cities could play a role in terms of not only the curricula, education, in terms of engaging the stakeholders, not the traditional education, but rather a new way of forming education from a human perspective, human needs perspective. Linked to that, and a point I always like to stress is entrepreneurship, innovation, and we see it in these pictures, particularly from young people. I think we should tap into what they're offering, and because they're driving a lot of agendas, and they have a different mindset. You can see it. I think it's again, it's context related, but the mindset of young people is different to the mindset of the not so young, let's say. So I think it's important to engage young people. So in our case, we have a program engaging young people for capacity building, Youth for Capacity program, and I'm very much looking forward to working more with you, definitely. Count on us. Thank you.
Fantastic. Simone?
I would want to add open-mindedness. You know, what I like about COP is you approach someone, you ask where you're from, you show your badge, or someone else asks, oh, yeah, interesting, what are you doing? And we're not judging. We're like, okay, what are you contributing to this common goal? And I think if we would have more of that, also in cities acknowledging that others are also doing a lot and they're doing the best by their means, that could hopefully bring us a step further.
Thank you very much. And I want just like to echo Alejandro that the young generation, that's also exactly what we have this 11 billion flourishing lives. We don't think anyone on this planet should have any dream that is less than that. If you're born in the slum or if you're born in a rich country, but we should have that as a joint vision that everyone on this planet should live flourishing lives. And I think the young people need that, not a fossil-free future. That, that's nice, but something where I flourish. So with that, I'd like to just hand over to Purya to end this session.
Of course. Thank you so much. I really wanted to, because I don't want the room to get tired of my voice. I've been speaking a lot today. But I really wanted to hear and learn from esteemed fellow panelists. And I really enjoyed what is happening here. And here's the deal. In most cases, when we are talking about different words, it's just like, not really clear. It's vague. But when we are talking about human needs and we unpack things and we have a local leader that's just like, yes, I love it. It resonates with me. And then Alison unpacked like, a sort of pleasant way of life for all of us. Like, it's like, yeah, that makes sense. 15-minute city, walking and then eating and then connecting to nature as opposed to this like type of unsustainable ways. And then we bring that conversation to someone who's an expert in capacity building and apart from their roles, just like trying to find the sort of synergistic points with capacities and talking about the capacities that is needed to, I really loved when you mentioned that not only capacities for climate, but also to improve the societies. And this is truly inspiring. And then that's their area to how to connect to this capacity. And then now the conversation is becoming more and more mature, like bringing different perspectives to the table. And it's really interesting. I'm sure you all have heard of this upcoming special report, IPCC special report on cities and climate science that everyone is talking about. And we were in a meeting with German Focal Point and some leading IPCC lead authors on 7th of November when they were showcasing all of these conversations in the past, but now started to talking about like, human needs. So it's really inspiring to see that it's now finding its way to even a type of more formal literature. We co-developed a section on this agenda setting innovation based on human needs for UCCR and ARC report that is hopefully sort of impacting and informing the structure of IPCC's special report. And it's Dennis, Simone, Alejandro himself are the co-authors of that. So it's really brilliant to see that this narrative is coming across from science to capacity building and out there with companies and really creating a sort of narrative that we all understand how to connect. And that will inform our action. And I think nothing is more inspiring on the fact that we know what we want and we are articulating based on human needs. And I'm so thankful that we as ICLEI are part of this conversation, hoping that we could drive this forward. Thank you everyone. Joining me to a round of applause for our esteemed panelists. Really appreciate that. But you don't go anywhere. We are having a very packed schedule today. Next session is going to be on building capacity for demand-driven technology and innovation in cities. And I would love to ask experts responsible for this session to come over to the stage.